You know that sense of security when you have a MacBook with you that in case anything comes up, you don't have to wait till you get back, and if nothing comes up, you've at least packed some entertainment on standby. This feeling of enablement is now stronger than ever with today's M4 line of MacBook Pros. I'll be speaking about the 14-inch with M4 Pro in today's video. Not the top of the line, but for what I would describe as a mid-range configuration, we have progressed to the point where this M4 Pro can, in many ways, hold its own against the max chips of previous generations. I've done some real-world comparisons across a few use cases, but as an appetizer, some synthetic benchmarks. I ran both Cinebench and Geekbench 6 comparing M4 Pro against a M2 Max as well as an M3 Max. The M4 Pro is in the lead when it comes to single-core performance, but quite surprisingly, it also came out on top for multi-core, beating out even the M3 Max by a small margin. When it's down to GPU benchmarks, however, that's when the Max chips still hold strong, though notably in the Cinebench test, M4 Pro still clocked in at a higher score than the M2 Max. Back in the real world, where we've got to work as hard as our MacBooks, playing back a heavy 4K timeline in Final Cut Pro was also impressively smooth. This is with render files and optimized media intentionally cleared out, playback set to higher quality, and background rendering disabled. The source media is untranscoded H.264, recorded with inter-frame compression, and it's also been color graded, so just about the most unoptimized, taxing playback conditions, and the M4 Pro's zipping through it like a champ. The results caught me a bit off guard, however, when I was comparing video export speeds against the M2 Max and M3 Max. These are results for a 3-minute 4K 30p timeline exporting to H.264. The M4 Pro took more time to finish than the 2 Max chips, but when I tried exporting this very same timeline into ProRes 422 though, the M4 Pro was the fastest. Even against the M3 Max, the M4 Pro was leading by a significant margin. This was completely outside of my expectations, because the Max chips actually have 2 ProRes encode-decode engines, while the Pro chips only have 1. So there's something about this new generation which puts it at a rather steep advantage when it comes to working with ProRes. It's also got a more powerful neural engine, so tasks powered by machine learning like the new magnetic mask tool do run faster on the M4 Pro, especially when compared against the older M2 Max. It is technically faster than the M3 Max, but I would call this close enough to say it's similar. I also gave some Apple Intelligence features a spin, like rewriting a 1400-word pages document. This is being processed locally on device, by the way, so processor capabilities do make a difference. I even turned Wi-Fi off while running this test to be absolutely sure. And again, M4 Pro came out fastest, marginally beating out M3 Max, but a notable speed boost over the M2 Max. There is also one performance-related feature that's being made available for the first time on the M4 Pro chips, and that's high power mode in macOS. For M1 and M2, high power mode was exclusive to the 16-inch Max configurations. For M3, it's available on both the 14 and 16-inch M3 Max, but for the first time with M4, it's available on both M4 Max and M4 Pro, 14 and 16-inch. The mode allows fans to run at faster speeds, so we can think of it as prioritizing performance over comfort. Now, all this performance is of course great for getting work done, but it's also equally great for not getting work done. I actually completed my first full playthrough of Stray on this 14-inch M4 Pro. I know gaming on Mac is still in the process of coming together, but the gaming experience is actually fantastic. The reason nobody's getting a Mac exclusively for gaming, at least right now, is because there aren't that many titles available yet. There's certainly progress being made. I hear Control and Cyberpunk 2077 are coming to Mac next year, but Stray, which is a game which I've been wanting to play for a while, has actually been available on Mac for about a year now. One thing about Stray is it's a fantastic game, but it's also a bit notorious for not being very well optimized for any platform other than the PlayStation 5. Even with that in mind, if I were to run it at the MacBook's native resolution of 3024 by 1964 at maximum quality settings, I still ended up with a very playable frame rate holding very steady at 30 frames per second. For the bulk of my playthrough, however, I ran it at 1920 by 1200, which gave me steady 60 FPS frame rates with the occasional spikes into the lower 100s. Switching over to a title with better optimization like Resident Evil 4, I was able to maintain a stable minimum of 60 FPS at full native screen resolution, high settings, and in fact my average frames per second was actually between 70 to 80. Although nobody really describes the MacBook Pro as a gaming laptop, the 120Hz ProMotion XDR display, coupled with the incredible speakers, seriously delivers a very pleasant gaming experience. Being able to interact with the in-game world in stunning HDR is one thing, but also the very MacBook advantage of being able to do all this on battery power alone. There's no difference in performance whether you're plugged in or unplugged, and when it comes to battery life on this 14-inch, 1 hour of unplugged continuous gaming consumed only about 30% of my battery. It also didn't run nearly as hot as I thought it might when it came to gaming especially. It's certainly a little warm, but still very comfortable. I even managed to play a few good hours of straight in bed, under cat supervision of course. But again, this is all happening on the mid-range M4 Pro chip. If for the past few years, your workload has always necessitated a max variant of the M series chips, now the Pro chips have gotten so good, you might not need to shell out the money for a max anymore. But one of the biggest physical advantages of the current M4 generation is the option to get a nanotexture display with your MacBook Pro. Now, I would option nanotexture in a heartbeat, especially on a MacBook Pro, because when you think of it, this is exactly the Mac which you'll end up using outside of a controlled environment. This is the Mac you would deploy in the field, and this is the display you'll have to look at under challenging lighting. If you're not entirely sure that nanotexture is for you, I'll break down how it affects reflections in three main ways. First, it completely eliminates low-intensity reflections, particularly in bright rooms where you might see the reflection of a wall or some furniture behind you. That completely disappears with nanotexture. For reflections of really bright sources like a light fixture, nanotexture reduces quite greatly the intensity of that reflection. But the third thing it does is diffuse it, essentially blurring out the reflection, which makes a huge difference when dealing with distracting or busy reflections. Think reflections of trees outside, window blinds, window grills, or if you're using your MacBook Pro in a studio, a softbox with a honeycomb grid on it. Some of the reflection is still there, but it no longer gets mixed up with your displayed content. Now, I'm not making this up, this is something which actually happened. I was trying to catch an episode of Silo, specifically Season 2, Episode 5, on a non-nanotexture display, and I ended up seeing a lot of myself. So I reached for my MacBook Pro with nanotexture and continued the episode from there. That was one of my proudest moments for owning a nanotexture display. Combine that with the elevated 1000 nit SDR brightness on these new MacBook Pros, and you have one of the best laptops for daylight visibility. If you're working from a bright cafe, out in the sun, or in a bright studio, you're going to be glad that you optioned nanotexture. On the MacBook Pros, nanotexture runs all the way to the edges of the bezel with a cutout for the upgraded center stage camera. In addition to the actual center stage feature itself, this camera also enables desk view out of the box. Previously, desk view was only possible via continuity camera, which means now there's zero additional footprint if you were to use desk view. I also noticed that you don't have to tilt your screen down as much for desk view when using the built-in center stage camera. It is a single camera setup, which means it's cropping the view of both your face and your desk from the same ultra-wide frame. This works a bit differently from the continuity camera version of desk view, which uses your iPhone's main camera for your face and the ultra-wide for your desk. To round this out, we'll touch on one more hardware improvement for the M4 MacBook Pros, although this is a bit dependent on whether you're on base M4 or one of the M4 Pros or M4 Maxes. On the M4 Pro, which I've got here, all three Type-C ports are now Thunderbolt 5. This is the same case with the M4 Max, and these ports are also backwards compatible with Thunderbolt 4 as well as USB 4. For the case of the base M4, the ports would still be Thunderbolt 4, but they now also come with that third port on the right side of the MacBook, which wasn't there back on M3. Now, I promise that this line was not written by Apple Intelligence, but I find even the smallest incremental improvements on this generation of MacBook thoroughly enlightening. Because 2 years ago, when I was reviewing the 16-inch M2 Max, one question I could not get out of my head was how in the world was Apple going to make a future better version of this? Because for me, back then, it was already a laptop which ticked all the boxes, and I even went as far as calling it the best MacBook ever. Now finally, I have the answer to that in the flesh, and it doesn't look all that different, but it's quite a bit better.